the entire book of Genesis like you've never seen it before. My name is Adam, and this is my story. I was the first man to ever exist, created by God Himself, placed in the Garden of Eden, a paradise tailored just for me. Every human being who has ever walked this earth is a descendant of mine, inheriting the burden of a sinful nature from me. Unlike the rest of creation, which God simply spoke into existence, God took a more intimate approach on that sixth day. He fashioned me from the very dust of the earth. Then He breathed life into me, His divine breath filling my nostrils, and in that moment, I became a living soul. It was this divine breath that set us apart from the animals. From then on, humanity could reason, reflect, intuit, and choose our paths. One day, while I was in a very deep sleep, the Lord formed someone from me. Her name is Eve, the first woman, and together we were placed in this perfect world God had created with only one rule: do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The option to disobey had to exist. Without it, our freedom would be incomplete. God intended us to be truly free, capable of making our own choices. However, we find the tragic account of my choice to sin. Both Eve and I disobeyed God's command and partook of the forbidden fruit, ushering sin and all its consequences into God's perfect creation. Through my actions, sin entered the world, and with it, death. In Eden's paradise, I awoke. Formed from dust, life breathed into me. I named animals, lived in harmony, yet loneliness struck deep. Eve's creation from my rib brought companionship, yet our fall from grace, enticed by forbidden knowledge, marked humanity's enduring struggle. I lost paradise, but maybe someone, somewhere will find the solution. My name is Adam, and this is my story. My name is Seth, and this is my story. I'm Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. My birth followed the tragic event where my brother Cain murdered Abel. It was a time of great sorrow for my family, but my mother Eve saw hope in my arrival. Cain was another step away from the divine plan. Just as my father was cursed, Cain was cursed. The first man's sin made the second man slay the third man, but now I'm here. My mother Eve believed that God had appointed me to replace Abel, hence naming me Seth, which means set in place of, according to Scripture. Life unfolded before me as I grew, and when I reached 105, my son Enosh was born. This event marked the continuation of what some call the godly line of Seth, leading eventually to Abraham. The story of my family, with Cain killing the righteous Abel and God raising another in his place, is a central theme in the divine plan. It illustrates the constant battle between good and evil, with God always intervening to preserve the righteous. Through my descendants, including Enosh, you were eventually born. After the birth of my son Enosh, men began to call on the name of the Lord, fulfilling my mother's prophetic words about the purpose of my birth. This calling upon the name of the Lord signified a turning point. My family, descendants of Seth, initiated this practice of praising and worshiping God, distinguishing us from the lineage of Cain. Unlike Cain's descendants, who often strayed from God, my descendants remained faithful. Through my lineage, who would be born and who ultimately defeat Satan and condemn sin, fulfilling the prophecy of crushing the serpent's head. My story shows God is always faithful, even in the most challenging circumstances. My story also shows the importance of righteous living. My name is Seth, and this is my story.
My name is Noah. The world has been struck by an unimaginable catastrophe, leaving only my family and me as the last survivors. It's a surreal situation. Everyone is dead aside from my family. The scale of the destruction is unfathomable, and the loss of life is simply heartbreaking. I can't help but ask myself what went wrong, and how it all happened so quickly. This is a judgment beyond measure. How did this happen? How did we get here? numerous forces came together to make the flood happen. The sequence of events leading up to the Great Flood began with the creation of the sons of God, even before the world itself was created. These sons of God are believed to have possessed supernatural powers and were considered divine beings. However, it is said that one of these divine beings rebelled against God and became a fallen being, setting the stage for the catastrophic events that would follow. Heaven was originally intended to be their home for all eternity, but they've now fallen from it. What caused all of this to occur? These celestial beings, known as angels, decided to abandon their origin in heaven. They departed from their starting point and ventured forth into our world with their own agenda. They left their beginning. In the Garden of Eden, a paradise where Adam and Eve could live in peace and harmony, Satan launched his first assault on God's authority on earth. Adam and Eve fell and were cursed. Even now, my family still suffers tremendously from this curse. You see, farming and sustenance are very tough. The Lord said, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." Now my ancestors and I have had to sweat to survive. During this era, men were blessed with extraordinarily long lives, sometimes lasting hundreds of years. It was a different era, a time when humanity was still closely connected to its origins, and the world itself was younger and fresh. They carried the seed of humanity's first union with fallen angels. But despite their long lives and deep wisdom, these early people were not immune to the problems that often plague mankind. Issues like jealousy, anger, and sometimes even violence. However, there was a man my great-grandfather called Enoch. Enoch is the man that never died. In my family's history, my great-grandfather held a deep and sincere appreciation for God's love, which he expressed through his unwavering loyalty and fervent passion. As a result of his devotion, he became a conduit for the mighty power of God and was blessed with great manifestations of this power throughout his life. Interestingly, my great-grandfather's faith was so strong that he was often able to prophesy future events with remarkable accuracy. In fact, he even spoke about the Lord's coming judgment against the general populace long before it came to pass. Enoch always prophesied about the Lord's coming judgment against the general people. When Enoch lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah, my grandfather. Methuselah's life could have predicted my life, as his name meant when he died, it would happen. My father Lamech lived for 182 years and had me. He named me Noah, saying that I was to bring comfort and relief to our people who toil and labor painfully due to the cursed ground. This is who I am. I was born for the purpose of bringing relief. The world is an evil place. The Nephilim have invaded the world. Now, insert into this chaotic world an unusual development. The Nephilim were special and not like regular people. They were strong and larger than life, but they made the world's problems even worse. They were admired, feared, and even worshipped, pulling people further away from the true God who had created them. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Who were the sons of God? Like I said, these were fallen angels. These fallen angels descended on earth and gave birth to the Nephilim, or giants. The fallen. These beings corrupted the whole world. These angels, in rebellion against God, lusted after human women and took the human women. There were also giants on the earth in those days. Giants are the unnatural offspring of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. They were the mighty men of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. The earth was not a place of peace or kindness, but one filled with sin, violence, and moral corruption. Picture a bleak world where individuals are consumed by their own insatiable desires, relentlessly pursuing their self-serving agendas without regard for the well-being of others. God's grief over creation. Humanity, the crown jewel of creation, had lost its way. Rather than living in harmony with each other and the world, people were consumed by violence, wickedness, and deceit. God looked down upon his creation and felt an immense sorrow. And so, in his great pain, God made a difficult decision. Judgment was on its way. Fortunately, I had found grace in the eyes of the Lord. I was saved by an act of divine sovereignty. While I certainly cannot claim to be perfect like God, I made a sincere effort to follow his commands and live according to his will. My family and I followed the ways of the Lord. My family consisted of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. I obeyed God's commands as best as I could and understand them then. It points to a deep and serious problem in the world at that time. In times of great corruption and impending judgment, I received a divine message from God that was intended to save me and my family. Despite the grim circumstances, there was a glimmer of hope in the form of grace. Instead of completely wiping out humanity, God chose to preserve a small group of people, a remnant. I did not deserve or earn this grace. Rather, I stumbled upon it. Grace cannot be earned, but it can be discovered by anyone who seeks it. God said to me, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood." God said, "Make yourself." This means this was my project. I was not to simply contract it out to someone else. In order to prepare for the great flood, God instructed me to construct in it rooms, including stalls, pens, coops, nests, cages, and compartments, to house all of the animals and their provisions. To ensure the longevity of these structures, I was also instructed to coat both the inside and outside of each room with pitch or bitumen, a natural substance that works to waterproof the wood. What is described is not really a boat, but a well-ventilated barge meant only to float and not to sail anywhere. After all, an ark is a chest, not a ship. Afterward, the Lord shared with me the details of his plans. For behold, even I will bring a flood of waters on the earth, to destroy all life under the heavens in which there is the breath and spirit of life. Everything on the earth shall die. I was summoned to play a pivotal role in the most significant judgment and greatest salvation the world had ever experienced. It was an extraordinary moment, filled with great responsibility and purpose. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark. Thus I did according to all that God commanded me. I followed every instruction given by God with utmost faith and obedience. I was devoted and committed to fulfilling God's will without hesitation or doubt. I encountered multiple obstacles along the way, which made the process quite time-consuming and demanding. Do I have the manpower? I still have my grandfather Methuselah and my father Lamech. But then, the day arrived when I entered the ark, and the skies opened up with a deluge of rain that destroyed every living being that had been too preoccupied to heed the warnings. For 120 years, I devoted my life to preaching righteousness to the masses. I hoped to inspire change in their hearts and minds. But alas, it seemed my words fell on deaf ears. Then, the very day arrived, the day that ended all. My generation would be reduced to me. Most from my generation would end today. All those I grew up with will meet their fate today. And after the 7 days, God released the rain, and flood waters came on the earth. In the 600th year of my life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that same day, all the fountains of the great deep, subterranean waters burst open, and the windows and floodgates of the heavens were opened. It rained on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. All living beings that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle, domestic animals, wild animals, all things that swarm and crawl on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath and spirit of life, died. God never forgot me. He sustained me daily on the ark. But at this point, God again turned his active attention towards me. It was truly as if he remembered me again. I had been shut up in the ark for many a day, and at the right time, God thought of me. God instructed me to enter the ark at a specific time, but I was not informed of the time when I should exit. It was necessary for me to know when to enter, and God made sure I knew that. However, it was not important for me to know when to come out, and so God did not reveal that to me. He always lets his people know what is practically good for them. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth. And I withdrew the covering of the ark and looked, and indeed, the surface of the ground was dry. Picture this: the earth bursting with life as living creatures from the ark repopulate the planet. bringing back the vibrancy and diversity that was once lost. How compelling is that? Emerging from the confines of the ark, I stepped out into the vast world. I walked abroad, and the whole world was before me where to choose. Wow! The extravagant offering brought immense joy to God. It was almost like the mouth-watering savor of the roasted meat filled the air, triggering an intense feeling of satisfaction in God's heart. He was so pleased that he made a magnificent promise to me and to all humanity. God promised that he would never again destroy every living thing on earth with a flood of such scale as he did before. And there it was, the first rainbow. Can you imagine witnessing the very first rainbow that appeared on our planet? And what's even more thrilling is that God chose this magnificent creation as a sign of his faithfulness to me and all generations that followed. The rainbow is also a promise to you. When you see a rainbow, remember my epic story.
My name is Abraham, and this is my story. My dad, Terah, lived in Ur, an influential city in southern Mesopotamia. We set off for the land of Canaan but ended up settling in Haran instead. Now, things start getting interesting. That's when God speaks to me and tells me to leave everything behind and go to a land he'll show me. He promises me 3 things: my land, becoming a great nation, and blessings. These promises later become what we call the Abrahamic covenant. And you know what? I obeyed. I left everything behind just like that. The author of Hebrews talks about it, saying, I did it by faith, even though I didn't know where I was headed. Imagine leaving everything you know behind because you heard a voice telling you to. The family was everything back then, you know. It was unusual for us to live far apart from each other. Plus, before God called me, we were all wrapped up in worshiping those ancient Babylonian gods. But when Yahweh called, I knew it was time to move. My wife Sarah and I were getting old and still no kids. But God promised us a son, and I believed him. That faith is what got me credited as righteous. And you know what? God delivered on that promise. Isaac was born, and he was the heir we'd been waiting for. But then comes the real test of faith. God tells me to sacrifice Isaac. Can you imagine? The son I'd waited decades for, and now I'm supposed to offer him up as a sacrifice? It was a gut-wrenching moment, but I trusted in God. I figured if he promised me a son, he could bring him back from the dead if he wanted to. And you know what happened on that mountain? God provided a ram for the sacrifice instead. It was a real nail-biter, let me tell you. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I've had my fair share of issues. Like those times I lied about Sarah being my sister to protect my skin, or when we tried to take matters into our own hands with Hagar and Ishmael. Yeah, that didn't turn out too well. But here's the thing. Even in my failures, God was faithful. He protected and blessed me and you know what else? He promised to give me a son through Sarah, even when it seemed impossible. So yes, I'm not perfect. Far from it. My life is a living example of faith, even in uncertainty. Called to leave my homeland, I stepped into the unknown, embracing a covenant with God and becoming a patriarch. My trials, including Isaac's near sacrifice, tested my faith, shaping a lineage destined to echo through generations. My name is Abraham, and this is my story. My name is Isaac, and this is my story. My name is Isaac, which means he laughs. It's a name I bear with a mixture of pride and wonder, for it's a reminder of the improbable circumstances of my birth. You see, my parents, Abraham and Sarah, were quite advanced when God told them they would have a son. I was that son, born of their laughter and disbelief turned to joyous astonishment. I was not their first child. That honor belonged to Ishmael, my half-brother, born of Sarah's impatience and her maidservant Hagar. But I carried the weight of their hopes for a family, their dreams of inheritance and legacy. As I grew, so did the drama of our family life. My mother, Sarah's insistence on securing my inheritance led to the painful departure of Hagar and Ishmael. They left, bound by the decisions of my parents and the will of a God whose plans often seemed unfathomable. One pivotal moment in my memory is the journey with my father to Mount Moriah. It was there that Abraham, at God's command, prepared to sacrifice me. The weight of that moment still hangs heavy in my heart. The wood on my back, the knife in my father's hand, the whispered promise of a lamb from God himself. It was a test of faith that ultimately revealed the depths of my father's devotion and the mercy of our God. It was a day unlike any other. After the passing of my mother Sarah, my father took it upon himself to find me a suitable wife from among our clan. His determination mirrored his desire to ensure our lineage's continuity and safeguard the promises God had made to our family. And so I married Rebecca, my cousin, finding solace and companionship in her presence. Life brought its share of challenges and blessings. I became a father to twins, Jacob and Esau, and witnessed the turmoil from their rivalry. Despite favoring Esau, Jacob received the coveted blessing, a twist of fate orchestrated by Rebekah's cunning and my unwitting involvement. With my father's passing, I inherited his legacy and the weight of his promises. Together with Ishmael, we laid Abraham to rest, bridging the divide between our family tree branches, if only for a moment. In times of hardship, God's presence was my solace. He appeared to me during a famine, reaffirming his covenant with my family and promising to bless me and my descendants. His guidance led me to prosperity despite the challenges posed by jealous neighbors and dry wells. And so, I lived a life marked by obedience, surrendering to the will of God even when it seemed incomprehensible. My story may lack the grandeur of conquests or the fame of kings, but it is a testament to the faithfulness of God and his enduring promises. Born to Abraham and Sarah, my life was marked by a near sacrifice, teaching me profound faith. Inheriting God's promise, I found love with Rebekah and became a father to Esau and Jacob. My name is Isaac, and this is my story. My name's Jacob, and this is my story. My life began in a whirlwind of struggle. Even before I entered the world, I was entangled in a rivalry with my twin brother Esau, jostling for position in the womb and emerging grasping his heel. From the outset, my name Jacob, meaning he deceives, seemed to foreshadow the twists and turns of my journey. Growing up, Esau and I were as different as day and nights. While he thrived in the rugged outdoors as a skilled hunter, I found solace in the stillness of our family's tents. Our parents, Isaac and Rebekah, each had their favorites, deepening the fractures in our already divided household. This favoritism would echo through the generations, casting shadows on the relationships within our family, as I would later experience with my son Joseph. The pivotal moment in my life came when, with the help of my mother Rebekah, deceived my father Isaac to receive the blessing meant for Esau. This deception ignited Esau's fury, and I had to flee to my uncle Laban's house in Haran. Little did I know this journey would be the start of a profound transformation. On the road to Haran, I encountered God in a dream where he assured me of his presence and reaffirmed the covenant he made with Abraham. In awe of this encounter, I renamed Bethel, meaning House of God, and vowed to dedicate my life to him. In Haran, I fell deeply in love with Rachel, Laban's daughter, and agreed to work for him for 7 years in exchange for her hand in marriage. Yet Laban's deceit knew no bounds, and on our wedding night, he tricked me into marrying Rachel's older sister Leah instead. Despite this betrayal, I eventually married Rachel, albeit after another 7 years of labor. In the following years, my family grew, and I amassed great wealth through my dealings with Laban. However, tensions intensified, and God urged me to return to my homeland. With God's guidance, I left Haran with my wives, children, and livestock despite Laban's pursuits. As I journeyed back, the fear of facing Esau weighed heavily on me. In desperation, I wrestled with a mysterious figure whom I later realized was God Himself. This encounter left me with a new name, Israel, signifying that I had wrestled with God and men and emerged victorious. To my surprise, Esau's reception was one of warmth and reconciliation. Yet my distrust lingered, prompting me to settle in a different land where I named El Elohe Israel, acknowledging God's mighty presence. Despite my challenges and betrayals, God remained faithful to His promises. He blessed me with a large family and guided me through hardships, ultimately fulfilling His covenant with Abraham. In my final days, I blessed my sons and witnessed the legacy of faith and forgiveness unfold, knowing that God's plan transcends our flaws and shortcomings. My life may have been marked by deceit and struggle, but through it all, God's grace sustained me and shaped me into the leader of a great nation. Just as God used me despite my imperfections, He can use anyone who believes in Him to fulfill His purposes in the world. I, Jacob, tricked Esau for birthright and blessing, endured Laban's deceit for Rachel's love, and wrestled with God, earning the name Israel. Despite flaws and struggles, I fathered nations, witnessed God's providence, and shaped a chosen lineage. My name's Jacob, and this is my story. My name is Joseph, and this is my story. My story begins with a family torn apart by favoritism and envy. I was Jacob's 11th son, born to his beloved wife Rachel. From the moment I came into the world, it was clear that I was different, both in my father's eyes and in the eyes of my brothers. My father Jacob doted on me, perhaps too much. He made me an ornate robe, a symbol of his favoritism, which only fueled the resentment of my brothers. They despised me for the special treatment I received and the dreams that hinted at my future greatness. I'll never forget the day my brothers plotted to take my life. Their envy had reached a boiling point, and they saw me as a threat to their positions in the family. But thanks to Reuben's intervention, my life was spared, though I was sold into slavery instead. As a slave in Egypt, I faced many trials and temptations. Yet through it all, I remained faithful to God and refused to succumb to the advances of Potiphar's wife. My integrity cost me my freedom, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Thrown into prison for a crime I didn't commit, I continued to trust in God's plan for my life. Even in the dungeon's darkness, God's favor never left me, and I was given the ability to interpret dreams, a gift that would ultimately change my life. When Pharaoh's dreams troubled him, I was called upon to interpret them. By God's grace, I revealed the meaning of the dreams and warned of a coming famine. In doing so, I was elevated to power and authority in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Years later, when famine ravaged the land, my brothers came to Egypt for food. They didn't recognize me, but I knew them. I tested their hearts, longing to see if they had changed since the day they sold me into slavery. In the end, I revealed myself to them, forgiving them for their past sins and reassuring them that God had used even their evil intentions for good. Together, we were reconciled, and I was able to provide for my family during the famine. Ultimately, my story is a testament to God's faithfulness and sovereignty. Despite my trials and tribulations, God was always with me, guiding and using me to fulfill His purposes. And though my journey was marked by hardship and betrayal, it ultimately led to reconciliation and redemption. Betrayed by my brothers and sold into slavery, I endured, interpreting dreams in Egypt. Elevated by Pharaoh, I forgave, provided in famine, and reconciled family. My journey, marked by faith and forgiveness, reveals God's purpose through adversity, uniting us anew. My name is Joseph, and this is my story. And that is it, folks. The story of Genesis like you have never heard it before. If you want to see Exodus like this, then let us know in the comments. Stay blessed. May the Lord guide you and keep you as we learn more about the Bible.